Hamas terrorists conducted the bloodiest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. Young women were gang raped, tortured, mutilated, children decapitated, burned alive. Young people at a peace concert were savagely slaughtered. And how do we know this all happened? From the footage on Hamas's own body cams and their own cell phones. They recorded themselves. They were proud of the depravity.
Hello everyone, this is another episode of Gold as Girls. My name is Carla van Welsum. My co-host for today is Rachel Rappaport, and our special guest is Peggy Shapiro.
Peggy Shapiro is the Director of Legislative Policy and Outreach for StandWithUs. She's a lifelong Zionist and educator. A child of teenage Holocaust survivors, Peggy Shapiro was born in a displaced persons camp in Landsberg, Germany. She immigrated to the United States as a young child and was raised in Chicago and its suburbs. Peggy was one of the founding members and past president of the Association of Children of Holocaust Survivors in Chicago, as well as the founder of the International Second Generation, which was formed in 1982. In cooperation with Yad Vashem, Peggy collected and documented over 4,000 pages of testimony for Chicago area residents who had lost families in the Holocaust. The Book of Remembrance, which resulted from these documents, is displayed in its own room in the Illinois Holocaust Museum. She was appointed as special advisor to the President of the United States Holocaust Memorial Council by Elie Wiesel and served as the annual chairperson for the Elie Wiesel Lecture Series in Chicago for 26 years. Peggy was a former chairperson of the Foreign Language ESL department at Harold Washington College and professor for 31 years. She was awarded the City of Chicago's Prize for Excellence in Teaching and honored as a distinguished professor of the city colleges. In addition to numerous educational publications for major corporations, she has written extensive commentary on Middle East policies. Part of Peggy's Stand With Us portfolio was educating legislators about the BDS campaign. Working with national partners, Peggy was part of a small team which guided 32 states to pass anti-BDS legislation. Welcome, Peggy. Good to see you after a long time.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for that lovely introduction.
Yeah. You're welcome. We're very happy to have you here. The first question that I want to ask you is about the reality of the spike in anti-Semitism since October 2023. I think a lot of people were caught by surprise and didn't expect it. Some people were not shocked, but very disappointed. So how bad is it really?
Well, it's bad. I described it to you once as a tsunami of anti-Semitism. There's a giant wave that people feel is just crushing them. And it's as bad as most people think, and perhaps worse. On October 7th, 2023, Hamas terrorists conducted the bloodiest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. Young women were gang raped, tortured, mutilated, children decapitated, burned alive. Young people at a peace concert were savagely slaughtered. You had over 1,200 people murdered, over 200 kidnapped, and where their torture continued. And how do we know this all happened? From the footage on Hamas's own body cams and their own cell phones. They recorded themselves. They were proud of the depravity. And as Hamas terrorists celebrated as they murdered children, one of them called home to brag to his mother. And the world for a moment took a breath. What happened? And I gave it 2 weeks to start unraveling and become Israel's fault, but I was too optimistic.
Okay.
It happened much faster. So in the months following Hamas's attack, anti-Semitic incidents increased. The Anti-Defamation League, which keeps track of this, say they tripled in the last year. In social media, they went up 1,000% in the last year. In social media, that's where kids live. Now we see this in many ways. Sometimes what you see on the news, but there's things that aren't necessarily on the news that are part of this explosion. So one of the things that we saw happening right away, very soon, were ceasefire or divestment resolutions in city councils all over the country. We heard of one in Oregon, and then one in Vermont. Then we heard in North Carolina. They were popping up all over. Israel had not even begun to respond yet, and they were saying ceasefire. So after this horrendous attack that Hamas promised to conduct again and again and again, it's not me saying it, they're saying it, then they wanted a ceasefire before it. Well, the hostages were still in captivity, while Hamas was still firing thousands of rockets. It was called to ceasefire, and other kind of resolutions at the municipal level changed to divestment. It was to keep up a negative campaign, turning the story around so that Israel could be blamed. And these city council meetings were not your normal city council meetings. With these hostile resolutions, it sometimes burst into near violence because the anti-Israel mob tries to intimidate when it cannot convince. So we witnessed at these city council meetings, Jewish people having to be escorted out by the police because of the threat of the mob. Anti-Israel mobs got the home addresses of city council members and posted them online. This happened in Fort Collins, Colorado. In one place, also in Fort Collins, anti-Israel extremists glued themselves to the wall. To be honest, I would have left them there.
Me too.
But this biased misinformation, the information was so wrong. It was put forward not in the hope of affecting an international crisis, because city councils cannot vote on foreign policy, but it was taking the anger about the Hamas-Israel conflict and directing it at individuals. And so at one that I attended, the Evanston City Council near my house, they were saying Zionists are psychopaths. It got so bad that mayors were calling, what can we do? We don't want this. And the mayors themselves were being threatened. And now, just yesterday, the mayor of Portland, Maine, issued an apology for going along with one of these ceasefire resolutions. He said, upon personal reflection, I've talked to my Jewish neighbors. I've come to the conclusion that my vote on divestment was wrong. He went on to call himself pretentious. And he said he made a serious mistake in judgment and a betrayal to the trust of the Jewish people should expect from the mayor's office. So we saw those. We also, everyone tuned to the news, and you saw massive rallies. There were more than 2,100 rallies against Israel after October 7th. And that number, they stopped counting them in April. So since April to now, there have been more. And in these rallies, you would see designated foreign terrorist organizations were portrayed as heroes. People who were convicted terrorists, like Leila Khalid, were with their posters up there. Now, this wasn't an expression to a few individuals, and maybe everybody was sitting at the sidelines. Numerous cities, towns across the country, these terrorist groups were being lauded. and displayed. Now, my granddaughter goes to WashU, and she called me up. She was studying for finals in spring, and she called me up crying. The grandkids call me Sasa. She says, Sasa, I'm in the library, and there are Hamas people outside screaming intifada. She went to the library early in the morning. After she settled in there, they opened up an encampment where people were dressed like Hamas with Hamas banners, and any Jewish student who wanted to pass there would have to go through a gauntlet of the most vicious anti-Semitic material. Luckily, they have a very good president there, and he shut it down right away. They tried to open up again. He said, no, I believe in freedom of speech, but I also believe that everyone has to follow the same rules. So, but in other places, we saw that these encampments went on for days and weeks, and Jewish students were told, well, don't go directly to class, go around the building. Or, maybe you can take your class online. So that was one of the worst places where we saw the encampments. And it's one of the encampments, the University of California. This is just a tiny example. They're written in Arabic in the encampment. We want to burn Tel Aviv.
Yeah.
And protesters chanted, Al-Qassam, you make us proud. Kill another soldier now. So this has been going on. And I think the Jewish students and Jewish community, our heads are spinning. They're just reeling. People don't know what hit them.
Yeah. Wow. And the list can go on and on and on. And it comes from several different corners, I would say. So
yes.
Were you surprised when that wave of anti-Semitism erupted in the intensity, and also who is participating in the most relaying anti-Semitism today?
So I think I was disappointed, but less surprised than most people.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because we already saw a trend from 2019 to 2022 of anti-Semitism rising by just an alarming rate, more than doubling. We know from the FBI, this is prior to October 2023, that although Jews make up only 2% of our population, we are the victims of 60% of the religiously motivated hate crimes. And it's gotten worse since October, but there was already a lot of indication. And what we saw is there were anti-Israel groups establishing a massive network. One of the major groups is Students for Justice in Palestine, SJP, and they had a key role in organizing these encampments and marches. They vowed to seize our universities and force the administration to divest from Israel. These groups were aligned. There were others, JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace, Palestine Action, Palestine Youth Movement, Party for Socialism and Liberation, Students for a Democratic Society, the Young Democratic Socialists. There were a number of groups that had already developed a whole network where they were working with any other group that could portray themselves as a grievance group, whether they're homosexual or a women's group or an African-American group. And particularly disturbing were the anti-Israel professors. And this is nothing new. When I was a professor, when I just started, this is 40 years ago, the Saudis, some of the extreme members of the Saudi government, started buying department chairs in Middle East study departments at their most prestigious universities. Of course, the department chair sets the tone and hires other faculty. And this grew and grew and grew to not only be social science, but to go to all the social science, not just Middle Eastern studies, political science, social science. And now, when the Saudis aren't doing this, we find out that Qatar contributed donations of 4.7 billion to the United States universities.
Yeah.
A lot of it wasn't publicly reported, but they're not doing this because they just have a love of universities here. They are expecting quid pro quo. And I will show you on a link to an Amcha published a list of the 200 worst anti-Semitic professors that you want to watch. This is a slide that shows you some of the places that had anti-Israel legislation at their city councils after October 7th. And here's a slide that shows you some of the threats made during these death threats, police escorts, activists gluing themselves to the wall, city council members doxxed, city council members in the middle of the night having their houses vandalized. It was my representative, Brad Schneider. And here are some signs of the hundreds of rallies where they're glorifying convicted terrorists and terror organizations. And when you asked me if I was surprised, we see the trend from 2012 to 2021 going higher and higher and higher, and it left unabated. Now, this is a well-orchestrated campaign. When I say some of the groups that are involved are SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, JVP, Jewish Voice for Peace, If Not Now, AMP. It's not little grassroots. If you want to look at what they're doing, they have a day of resistance toolkit where people go and they've exactly what messaging, how to influence. They have a ceasefire toolkit. They have a divestment toolkit. They work, and all over the country, it may seem like there are different initiatives, but they all have basically the same language.
And who's funding them?
The funding goes back, it's like a peeling an onion. We find the Rockefeller Foundation. My feeling is probably yes, but we find direct links to Tides Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Muslim Brotherhood.
Higher.
And I'm sure a lot on Qatar. And there's a clip here too about Hollywood. Anti-Semitism used to be considered not good for polite company. People wanted, even if they had their prejudices, they didn't want to openly display it. But now it is normalized by celebrities. Kanye West, he has a massive following, and we see his anti-Semitic statements. They have over bridges in cities. They have banners that say Kanye West was right. Roger Waters is sort of the leader of anti-Semitism in Hollywood, and here he is dressed to kind of look like a stormtrooper, and over his concerts you can find a large pig with a Jewish star, a Star of David, floating over his concerts. So this is a short video about anti-Semitism in Hollywood. I think it's just 2 minutes. And so this BDS movement has been entrenched for at least 16 years and gaining, and they seek to destroy Israel. And so that's why the BDS movement said Hamas, after Hamas did what they did on October 7th, they called it a powerful armed reaction. They complemented it. And it's important for people to know what the BDS campaign is. It's not what they tell you, but you can take a look. It's not to bring humanitarian aid. It's not to establish a border here or there. It is to destroy Israel. and don't believe me, believe them. Omar Barghouti said, "We oppose a Jewish state in any part of Palestine." And BDS aims to turn Israel into a pariah. And the real aim of BDS is to bring down the state of Israel. This is Asad Abu Khalil. So here is a movement that's been going for over 14 years, and their goal is to destroy Israel.
And interestingly enough, I know quite some Jews that support it without really knowing what it is about, but just like, oh, let's support it. It's nice, the poor Palestinians, right? And
well, and in fact, here's how it helps the poor Palestinians.
Yeah.
You had a company in the West Bank that SodaStream, they manufactured a product that was very popular and employed Palestinians at the same salary which was 4 times higher than the average salary in the West Bank. So they employed 200 Palestinian families at a very good salary with all the holidays off and benefits. BDS targeted SodaStream and they moved. They're still producing their product, but they're not employing the Palestinians of the West Bank. And they lost 200 good paying jobs. Yeah. So, and I didn't see anyone in the BDS campaign offer to, share their money.
Yeah, exactly.
With the Palestinians. Yeah.
Exactly. It's so hypocrite.
So what I want to ask you is, why do so many people find it difficult to identify anti-Semitism, and what makes it different than any other forms of hate towards any other group of people?
This is a problem because anti-Semitism is like a virus. When you had the COVID-19, the first strain of the virus, well, now whatever form of COVID, it has morphed, mutated into many other forms. And that's what anti-Semitism is. So there are 2 basic reasons why anti-Semitism is difficult to identify. One is because it evolves and it manifests itself differently. And the second is because anti-Semites want to camouflage their own conduct. So I'll give you an example. Anti-Semitism started with religious anti-Semitism. Jews were hated because we didn't accept Christ. When that wasn't quite enough, then Jews were hated because we killed Christ. And I mean, what can be worse than someone who kills a deity? And around that religious anti-Semitism came all kinds of anti-Semitic tropes, like the blood libel, that we drink the blood of Christian children, or we use it to make matzah, and various horrendous demonic conspiracy theories. When we came around the time of the Enlightenment and the starting of states, nation states, we thought, oh, the church had less hold, so anti-Semitism should be better. Well, what happened when nation states started forming, Jews weren't part of the nation state. So they became the other. And the new kind of anti-Semitism then was, well, you are not to be trusted. You have dual loyalty. We can't count on you. And they're parasites on the economy. Around the same time, Darwin had his theories of evolution. And there we saw social Darwinism. So people say, well, some people are better off than others. And if we have survival of fittest, it must mean that the people who are in the worst conditions are the worst, weakest links. And so social Darwinism, well, look at the Jews here. They must be an inferior race. Mm-hmm. And then it became racial. And of course, Hitler grew that. And at the same time, the Jews were considered inferior. There were economic theories that we control the world. And it's because it's based on hate. It doesn't have to have any facts. It can live without a single fact sustaining it. Jews were blamed for communism by people who were capitalists, and they were blamed for capitalism by people who were communists. It didn't, so it changes. It morphs into any of the newest things we hate. Now, we saw when the COVID epidemic hit, and Israel was blamed for COVID. In most of the Arab world, they believed that Israel caused 9/11. We know that racism is bad. So now obviously Israel has to be blamed for and accused of being racist. What is worse than apartheid? So Israel is being accused of apartheid. So whatever society deems the worst, and they need to blame someone, all of these, that's why it's difficult. It changes over time. And that's why we need a definition that will help us recognize it when it hits us in the face today. And another thing, the anti-Semites do not want a definition of anti-Semitism that includes their own conduct. So anti-Semites are very active in trying to come up with their definition of anti-Semitism. But I'm not going to turn to a racist for his definition of racism, a misogynist for his definition of misogyny, or an anti-Semite for their definition of anti-Semitism. But that's why, in a nutshell, because it has so many shapes and manifestations that people can get confused. But we do have a remedy.
Well, what I would like to add maybe is the religious part coming from Islam. I read the Quran years ago. I had in the Netherlands where I grew up quite some Muslim friends. I heard certain truth that a lot of people even don't want to hear. And what is, for instance, written about Jews in the Quran and what is written in the oral hadith, right? The things that are coming up a little bit now. And then what I've seen in Europe and what you mentioned, the anti-Semitism from Catholicism and from the churches, but from the mosques, we don't have the same history, but Jews living in Muslim countries wasn't great either. They had always special laws. They were not safe either. And today, because of, I think, internet and social media, their voices are so big. And I have done a lot of replying on social media, on TikTok, which I don't like. And there was an Israeli group of people that did it constantly every day, and they asked our help. And they say a third of TikTok is extremely anti-Semitic. And I have had many conversations, and there's a lot of young people, but very intertwined with young Muslims and believing a lot of lies that are in the nature of the blood libels that we know already and the elderly of Zion, right? But with more from an other point of view, because it is so motivated with a lot of hate coming from, it's not your country, it's our country. There were no Jews living there. Abraham was a Muslim. I mean, there are so many crazy stories going around, believed by many, and there is a lack of historic awareness. And we left in 2004 because of this, all what happened there already. I have seen them dancing in the streets with September 11 and with burning the American flag, but also the Israeli flag. If you burn, you do both. And I think it is worldwide so scary.
It's terrifying. And we look a little bit back in history. Mm-hmm. How did Muslim or the Arab countries, their anti-Semitic posts and their anti-Semitic writings and their anti-Semitic memes, how did they come to look so much like the Nazi messaging?
Yeah.
It wasn't by accident. And this is another talk, but if you look at the Nazis who escaped to the Middle East after the war, after World War II, many of them were in the propaganda campaign. They were in communications in Germany. Yeah. So they changed their names. Reinhardt could become Rahul or whatever, but they changed their names. But they started integrating anti-Semitic propaganda into Arab media. So what was it already could have been, hey, we don't want anyone here on our land, or a dispute of land, took on much more. It brought in the European anti-Semitic tropes.
Yeah, also. Yeah, definitely. And you would wonder why, but yeah, the Mufti of Jerusalem, he was also a big fan of Hitler. And
Right.
Mahmoud Abbas made his dissertation about not really the denial of the Holocaust, but still that there were Zionists working together with Nazi Germany. Yeah, why? To get Jews out. I mean, it's so twisted everywhere. It's horrible.
Well, it is twisted. And in order to get some clarity, which was very important, it's important now, but it was important in 2016, when a group of renowned scholars, historians, Jewish record keepers, and so on, that belonged to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, and these were scholars from over 30 countries, sat down and said, we have to have a definition of anti-Semitism so that people who want to be able to identify it and address it and oppose it will know what it is. Sometimes we see anti-Semitism only because out of total ignorance, people have no idea that what they said was anti-Semitic.
Also, yeah.
And other times people kind of do know what they say, but they think they can get away with saying it's not. So these scholars developed a definition, and the definition has 11 clarifying examples. Like any definition in your dictionary, you open it up, it has how to pronounce it, and some examples so you know how to employ it, how to employ that word. And this was a very, very important development, because if not, we would be all at loose ends. How do we address this? Now, it's not that their definition will cover everything, but it covers a lot. And it covers not only anti-Semitism against the individual Jew, but it covers anti-Semitism against the Jewish collective, that's Israel. Because people were trying to say, listen, I am not an anti-Semite. I am just anti-Israel.
Yeah.
Well, if you are promoting the murder of one person because he's Jewish, then you're an anti-Semite. But if you're promoting the murder of 7 million people because they have a Jewish state, that's also anti-Semitism. And so this definition, I think, is something that people need to know, and they need to bring it to all the authorities, the police department, the schools, and we can definitely help with that, to get every institution possible to adopt it. And I'd like to show you more about what this is, and then what everybody can do, what anybody who's listening to this can do immediately to take a step in the right direction.
And that is with Stand With Us?
Yes.
Great.
And we have now worked on getting this adopted, and I think it's about 30 states.
Oh.
I haven't stopped to count, but I'd like to share that with you, because if people know what it is, you see that anti-Semitism evolves over time. You see examples of anti-Semitism on the tableau. Jews are controlling the world. They control Wall Street. You see these same images. You shame students. It can be the Jews are rich. They control the banks. So there are various ways in which it can manifest itself. But we need to define it to defeat it. And what is good about this IRA, or International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition, is it is the gold standard. It is the consensus-driven global definition. Right now, it's been adopted by over 1,200 different organizations, including the Global Imams Council, which is the largest council of imams in the world. They adopted it.
That is great.
That's interesting. I wanted to ask you, Peggy, apparently some people are opposing it. Why would they oppose it?
Well, I would like to get to that in a minute.
Okay.
You know what? Sometimes when people are doing things that are wrong, they like to keep the lights off so that you don't shine a light on it. But I will go to that in just a moment. I think it's important to know what the examples are. The definition that you see here is kind of vague. And if you just have that definition, you're not going to be able to pick it out. But the examples are guidelines. The definition doesn't say every time you see this, it's anti-Semitism, but it says this may well be anti-Semitism. You have to look at the context too. But for example, calling for aiding, justifying, or killing, harming of Jews in the name of a radical ideology or extremist view of religion. So calling from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That is calling for the annihilation of the whole state of Israel.
Yeah.
Or when they had signs in campuses, by any means necessary. What did it mean? Mass rape and savage brutality were all okay to harm Jews. Another example of anti-Semitism, according to IRA, is making mendacious, dehumanizing, or stereotypical allegations about the power of Jews, the world conspiracy of Jews. It's actually funny. Years ago, more and more conspiracies were coming out. And I started a blog called Conspira Nuts. And every week I would put my favorite new conspiracy theory. So one time, Iran arrested a squirrel for being a Mossad agent. I couldn't make this up. In Egypt, there were attacks by sharks, and they said that Israel had trained the sharks to attack Muslims.
I love that. We get so much stuff out here.
So I started this because, and I quoted this, it was really insane. So you have all these conspiracy theories about what bad things we do and can do. And you'll see the image here blaming Jews for COVID, blaming Jews for 9/11, or accusing Jews as a people of being responsible for the real or imagined wrongdoings of a single Jewish person. I don't know how you grew up, but when I was growing up, we heard, there was a crime committed. There was an embezzlement or someone robbed the bank, whatever the crime committed. The first thing my mother would say, what was his last name?
Yeah.
Just please.
Let him not be Jewish.
Let it not be a Jewish last name, because then we're all, blamed for that. Another interesting, these two are very close to each other. It is denying the fact, scope, and mechanism of the Holocaust. And you mentioned Mahmoud Abbas's dissertation. Well, it falls right in there. Or accusing Jewish people or Israel state of inventing or exaggerating the Holocaust. This little flyer on the top right is what we found lying around hundreds and hundreds of driveways in the Chicago area and different places. Or another example is accusing Jewish citizens of being more loyal to Israel or their Jews than to the U.S. We've had students on campus who were elected to student government and then challenged, well, can you be in student government since you're a Zionist? Nobody asked, well, so if you're Irish, can you be on student government? Or if you come from South America, can you be? Nobody, but questioning our loyalty. And my favorite person in Congress, Ilhan Omar, this is a quote. I should not be expected to have allegiance, pledge support to a foreign country, implying that people who are pro-Israel have dual loyalties. Of course, she has been paid by radical governments and has flags of other countries in front of her office. So I don't know how serious she is about that suggestion.
Mm-hmm.
Another example is denying Jewish people the right to self-determination. Now, when you say that the birth of Israel is Nachba, a catastrophe, that means it was created in sin. If it was created, it's a racist endeavor, that it's an apartheid state. It has no legitimacy. Now, I'll tell you when this started. It's kind of interesting. In 1967, there was a big war, and ostensibly it was between Israel and her neighbors, but really it was a proxy war, the U.S. and the Soviet Union, because the U.S. was supplying Israel, the Soviet Union the other side, and it was a test of the two superpowers. The Soviet Union lost in a very noticeable, obvious, humiliating way. Soviet tanks were left all over the battlegrounds, and they were enraged at the humiliation of their loss. So they started an anti-Israel campaign, unlike anything you have ever seen in modern propaganda. And that's where Zionism is racism, Zionism is colonialism, Zionism is occupation. All these themes came as part of the Soviet revenge campaign about 67.
That's wow.
But that's another lecture about where these things came from.
Yeah.
But using symbols and images associated with classic anti-Semitism. Now, you see in the past, they blamed Jews for killing Christ. Well, look on the crucifix here. Christ is now a Palestinian. So it's using these very old anti-Semitic tropes to apply to the modern situation, and applying a double standard for Israeli behavior, not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. If you want examples of that, open up a newspaper any day of the week.
Yeah, exactly.
And we see it. And the final two is drawing comparisons of Israeli policy to that of Nazis. And this meme shows you that Israel is being compared to the Nazis. It's as if they can catch Jews being as evil as they were, it alleviates their responsibility, alleviates their guilt, and you too did it. And it's an inversion. They will deny the Holocaust, diminish it. It didn't happen. And if it did happen, it wasn't as bad as you say it was. And if it did happen and it wasn't as bad as you say it was the Jews who did it anyway. So they're inverting it. It's saying the Jews are responsible.
And you get rid of your guilt in that way.
Pardon?
You get rid of their guilt. I mean, I know how that developed in Europe. I lived it. Yeah.
Yeah. So they would love to catch us at something because then they won't look as complicit.
Yeah.
And then holding Jews collectively responsible for the state of Israel. And we see that happening on campuses unless Jewish students will denounce their connection to Israel, or they feel that they will be held to blame for the government's policies. And Michelle, you asked me, well, it seems like this definition is a no-brainer. So why are people objecting to it?
I truly want to thank you so much, Peggy, for all your beautiful information and valuable information, rather. And thank you so much for being with us. And Rochelle,
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.